Well, I hope you had a good night and that you are full of energy for this new day of the forum. It's my great pleasure and a real honor for me to welcome you to take part in this second plenary session of EQAF Forum. The session was given the title, Taking Stock. So what does it mean? 2015, it's been now 5 years since the European higher education area was launched. And how does it look like? What have we achieved in that field, and where does quality assurance fit into this? Where are we lagging behind with respect to the goals identified? This session will tackle with these questions through a dialogue between two speakers who will be looking at the developments through different lenses, those of higher education institution and those of students, both using evidence from two recent publications, the EUA Trends 2015 about learning and teaching in European universities. This publication is available on the website of EUA. And the second publication is the ESU 2015, Bologna with Student Eyes, which is also available on the website of ESU. So the first part of this session will consist of a dialogue between our two guest speakers, Andrés and Jens. I will use some guiding questions to bring them to an exchange of ideas, comments, messages to you. In the second part of the session, it will be you, participant, to join the dialogue, and to bring in questions, comments, arguments, counter-arguments. And I do hope that you will be willing to do so. So first, let me introduce our speakers. André Suxoc is Senior Advisor at the European University Association, where she also served as Deputy Secretary General and Head of the Quality Assurance Unit between 2001 and 2009, with responsibility for developing EUA's quality assurance policy positions and activities, and also representing EUA in European and international discussions. As you may know, she has written and spoken widely about quality assurance and change in higher education, with a particular interest in the link between internationalization, quality assurance, mission diversity, innovation, and creativity. She is the author of Trends 2010, which analyzed a decade of policy change in European higher education, and Trends 2015, a report that analyzes developments in learning and teaching in Europe. Because of, or rather say thanks to, that her expertise, she has become a sort of higher education globetrotter. She conducted several evaluations, for instance, of African universities. Recently, she's been asked to observe the process of self-reflection of the Iceland higher education quality assurance system. She serves on the appeal committee of the Portuguese accreditation agency. She sits on the boards of several quality assurance agencies in the French community of Belgium, in Dubai, among others. Her academic background, she earned her first degree in philosophy from the University of Paris, first Panthéon-Sorbonne, and a PhD in social cultural anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley. Well, to finish our introduction, let me quote Leslie Wilson, the present Secretary General of EUA, about André. Leslie says, "She knows and cares more about university and their development than anyone else I know. And the EUA wouldn't be the organization it is today without the commitment and dedication of André, not to mention her expertise and great experience." Jens Jungblut. Well, he's presently a PhD researcher fellow at the Department of Education at the University of Oslo in Norway. He holds a Master of Political Science from the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, and his academic work focuses on higher education policy and governance, political parties, political youth organizations, student unions, and organizational change in higher education institutions. He is particularly interested in understanding how higher education policies are shaped by the influence of political parties. Another example, he recently co-published an article in Studies in Higher Education, assessing the political importance for the different actors involved of the Bologna process across time and space. He's been previously active in European Student Union, ESU, as well as in the German National Union of Students. He was also involved in ESU Quest project, analyzing the student perception on quality in higher education, and still serves as a member of the Magna Carta Observatory Council. So, from what I've just said about our two guest speakers, you can see that both of them are knowledgeable, curiosity-driven, and committed persons. So, James, I will start with you. What are, in your view, the three most important findings of the ESU Bologna report?
Thanks a lot, Kati, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. I think if we want to take three main messages from Bologna with Student Eyes, and maybe also to give a background for those who have not yet read Bologna with Student Eyes, because I'm sure most of you will download it now at this moment from the website. We have a lot of traffic there now. It is a survey that ESU conducts with its members, which are National Union of Students, asking them their perception about the implementation of the Bologna process or the European higher education area in their perspective, in their respective country. So to get the student union perspective as a way to complete the picture together with the trends report and the official government reports to the ministerial conferences. So the latest edition, the 2015 report, to summarize it in three main messages, I would say one could say, okay, a lot has happened with regard to crafting a common European higher education area, and especially quality assurance, also from the student union perspective, is seen as part of the process that shows not only higher levels of formal policy coordination, so people start doing the same thing, but also a lot of the implemented changes on the national institutional levels give quite a lot of hope that we're moving in the same direction. So there's quite a positive note, especially when it comes to quality assurance from the viewpoint of student unions. However, there's also some criticism or some more negative viewpoints when it comes to some other action lines of the Bologna process that are not as equally implemented in all countries. And the European Students' Union and its national members actually raised the fear that it moves to a very unequally driven process, so that we have some very eager national systems and we have some less eager national systems, and that especially some of the structural reforms, like the provision of diploma supplements or recognition procedures, which also have clear links to quality assurance and quality assurance processes, are seen as especially problematic when it comes to the equal implementation across the European higher education area. Combined with the funding situation, which gets more tense throughout Europe, this actually might lead to what ESU calls a differentiated development between countries, and they see it as a threat to the holistic idea of the European higher education area. And the third point, which links also a bit to one of the studies that Kati mentioned in my introduction that I just did with two colleagues, one from Jeroen Center in Ghent and another one from NIFU in Norway, where we actually looked into the participation list of conferences for the Bologna process. And our finding actually echoes one of the main points that Bologna with Student Eyes did, which is that it seems the Bologna process is losing a bit its sex appeal, politically speaking. So to speak to use more of a political science language, it's less politically salient. So you can see that it's maybe turning to be less important for the countries, which combined with this differentiated development can actually lead to a very unfortunate situation that we have some people who still care, some people who push the process ahead, and others who just stop caring and just see it as a formal exercise.
Mm-hmm. Which explains perhaps the drawing that is on the
yes.
cover page of the report. Thank you, James. André, are these findings confirmed by Trends 25, and are there critical other elements that are not covered that you would like to mention?
Well, good morning, everyone, first of all, and thank you, Kathy, for the wonderful introduction. I would say that, in fact, yeah, there are some similarities between the two publications to the extent that both of them explore areas of convergence and divergence in higher education, in European higher education. Now, just a quick word on, I will develop this more in a minute, but perhaps I should start by explaining that Trends 2015, contrary to the other trends that we have done, is really focused on developments in teaching and learning. So we didn't try to do what we used to do in the other trends report, which was to look at all the structural reforms, which is what you have done this time around. So we have not done that. What we have done is try to focus on teaching and learning and not look at, for instance, things like the diploma supplement or the implementation of the 3-cycle structure and things like that. Now, we absolutely are on the same line concerning the quality assurance. There is a great deal of development in this area. It's extremely positive. It is going in the same direction. There are, I think, very good reasons for this. If you think about the work that each of the organizations and the E4 are doing in providing support to the agencies and to the institutions to develop internal and external quality assurance. This, I think, is the success story, or one of the success stories of the Bologna process. We would also agree that Bologna is losing momentum and that we need to do something about it. I remember that in 2010, in autumn 2010, we had, and I will remind you that that was the year when we launched the EHEA. In 2010, in the autumn, EUA had its annual conference. We had invited a Canadian speaker, Alex Usher, whom some of you might know, and who basically asked us, why don't you just declare victory and go home? And what was the point? He couldn't see the point of why we were continuing with this. The fact is that people felt the need to continue with this platform of dialogue. And it seems to me that it is increasingly important nowadays with all the events that we are all the tension in the world, that we provide such a platform. I know the associations do that already. It's been extremely important in the history of Europe to provide that kind of cooperation and support to people who were not always in the same political sphere. It is also important, I think, for governments to continue to have a platform. And higher education is extremely important, has an extremely important role to play, I think, in helping us face the crisis that we are facing today. Now, I'd like to say a few words then about what we have uncovered in trends that was not touched upon by Jens. We have looked at teaching and learning, as I said, and have realized that the institutions have become extremely strategic have become more strategic over the years that we have been plotting their development. They have been more strategic in quality assurance, in internationalization, in teaching and learning in general, giving it a priority, including for the institutions that define themselves as being research intensive. We see that they are being strategic in reaching out to students of diverse background, in providing them with support. We also see that there is a great deal of activity in supporting staff, in supporting academic staff, so that they are teaching in different ways and teaching in better ways. So this is, I would say, in a nutshell, what are the major conclusions of trends. And it is quite optimistic, because when you look at the analysis of the background that we provide at the beginning of the report, it is a bit depressing. There is a great deal of divergence in Europe. If we look at the economic situation, if you look at the demographic situation, with lots of differences. But somehow, the situation becomes a lot more optimistic when we look at what the institutions are really doing for their students. So there is hope, I think.
Any comments to what André has just said?
Just very briefly, maybe that when it comes to the importance of teaching and learning and the role of teaching and learning in the European higher education area, Bologna with Student Eyes and the results completely agree with trends in the sense that it's highlighted also there. It's becoming more important, and it's a good thing that it's becoming more important. It's become more central not only in the institutions, but also as a policy issue on the European and national levels. And I think part of it is also thanks to the activities of different projects that the different stakeholder organizations have been running throughout the last years. When it comes to the part about student support and the finance situation, I mean, one of the sadly usual criticisms that Bologna with Student Eyes raises overall the last years has been the sidelining of the social dimension of the Bologna process. And I think that continues to be an issue, especially with the funding cuts, budget cuts in the national level, that this is actually might be getting more problematic.
Okay, thank you. Let's shift a little bit to quality assurance, André. What would you say are the three more important achievements about quality assurance in higher education?
Well, I know many of you were in Budapest. Can we have a show of hand at the forum in Budapest? You recall that at the forum in Budapest, we had talked about, among other things, about rankings. And at that time, there was quite a bit of discussion about whether the rankings were actually a form of quality assurance. And the conclusion of the forum, the EQAF in Budapest, was that they were not. And I think we have maintained in Europe this position that the rankings are not equivalent to quality assurance. And I think that's really very good, because it has allowed quality assurance to continue to develop in very good ways. So I would say that the major achievements of in quality assurance in Europe have been driven by the work of the E4, either collectively or individually with their own members. It is about the very quick development of internal quality developments in institutions. This has been extremely positive because it has supported the institutions in the development of their strategies and their implementation. It is about student involvement. ESU has been instrumental in advocating for student involvement, and I think we're all now on board with this. And we find it unacceptable if students are not involved in quality assurance, whether they are sitting on panels or being part of university committees and so on. And the third element is internationalization. So it's the internationalization of institutions, extremely important for their quality. And we already saw that in 2010, one of the major results of trends was that the institutions that were the most internationalized were also the most interested in developing their internal quality management processes. But we're also seeing it with the agencies and the internationalization of the panel, the panels, the exchange that the platform that ENQA provides to the quality agencies. All this is really contributing to what Jens was speaking about at the beginning, which is great convergence. I mean, or, you know, there is a common house, there is a common roof for quality assurance in Europe. And it is different from other places, other regions in some aspects. So that, I think, is very positive.
Jens, would you agree with that assessment? Do you see other achievements over the 10 last years in the domain of quality assurance?
I mean, in general, I agree that, as I also said before, that there's a very positive development. And maybe to highlight some other points a little bit, picking up the student participation point that André already made, I think also Bologna Student Eyes 2015 shows very clearly that both in internal and external quality assurance, it is more or less the norm. I mean, there are maybe a handful of countries where this is not yet a reality. And I think this is also important for the wider discussion about student involvement on different levels, because what you also can see is that often quality assurance is a door opener for student involvement, or also in governance processes and on other levels. So because for quality assurance, it's often the first more natural step to involve the voice of students, and then from this it spirals on that you also involve them in governance decisions and so on. So from that part, this is actually very, very positive development. Something that maybe contributed to this, or maybe also was a result of this, which is also very, I think, positive development when it comes to the professionalization of people doing quality assurance throughout Europe, is that we have now 21 countries in Europe that have some form of a quality assurance experts pool that also includes students, or is in some cases only for students, and where student experts who take part in quality assurance processes are trained, are properly prepared for these processes. And I think that has a very good potential to assure the quality of quality assurance at the end of the day. Because there are still some problems that are also reported by students and student unions when it comes to their involvement. Because they often report to lack infrastructure and training on the issues, because the student life cycle is simply much shorter than the one of, let's say, an academic or somebody who is administratively in charge of quality assurance. So the need to train people, to bring people in the debate is always a bit bigger, and there's always the burden towards the student experts to prove themselves in a certain way, because if you have done quality assurance, let's say, for 20 years, and then there comes a student, the person has to catch up. And I think that still creates problems, both for the students and the experts pools to prepare the people, but also for the quality assurance professionals and the other people involved in it to accept that there's this imbalance and to treat this imbalance, and then to accept also the view as equal partners. Because that's also one of the parts that is sometimes reported as still a bit problematic, is that you meet on an eye-to-eye level between the different groups that take part in quality assurance. And maybe as a last point, one of the positive examples that Bologna Student Eyes mentions is actually the work of the register. So EQA is highlighted very positively in the report. Also the National Union see it very positive, and actually propose some points to actually expand the word of EQA, and maybe also push their countries to be more open, to open up to agencies which are registered in the register, and to go to this international dimension of quality assurance also in a certain way.
Okay, thank you. So we talked about Bologna reform, we talked about quality assurance. Let's shift slightly to quality culture now. What would you think, and that's the same question for both of you, what could the stakeholder groups, so here namely the students, representatives, and the association representatives of institutions,
do in the future, now and in the future, to foster this quality culture throughout Europe? Who wants to start? Jens?
I can also start, okay. I think one of the concrete points that I already mentioned are these expert pools. I think they are a good starting point to, because as we already also saw yesterday during Jeroen's presentation, the whole concept of quality culture is not that easy to grasp, and it's very multifaceted. And if we really want to maybe have it really as a foundation of our activities, we need to make sure that people are in touch with this concept, that they know what it means. And I think that these training or exercises are a very good starting point for this. Because what we might, I mean, there are also problems in it. Because we saw, for example, in the Quest project that you mentioned also in an introduction that I did work on together with a lot of other colleagues for ESU, we did a survey of students, and not student unions, but actually students, what you could call ordinary students, throughout Europe to try to get an idea of what their vision of quality in higher education is. So what, if you say, define quality in higher education, what is it? And what we found actually is that this is a very, very complicated thing to get to, and that actually it's a very, very diverse visions and thoughts on quality in higher education out there, not even within Europe, but also within national contexts. And I think that is a challenge, because I have the feeling that if we would do the same with academics or with institutional leaderships or institutions, we would get maybe a similar picture, that depending on your point of view, quality might mean something very different. And then getting to some kind of a common European quality culture has to stay on a certain very abstract level to take everybody in. And that might make it difficult to really enshrine it in people, because then you have to think about what is it beyond the process that we're actually talking about. And I think a quality assurance, a quality culture is not about kind of a mechanistic process, but it's about some values, some understanding of core foundations. And that might get challenging.
Okay, thank you. André. Quality culture, a topic that you know well.
Yes, well, I mean, I can't help but saying that one of the ways that we promote this is through the forum. And this annual forum that's been so successful from day one has been, I think, instrumental in giving an opportunity for people to speak to each other, and I'm also very encouraged to see that there are so many new people who have shown up this time, and I'm sure that was true of the other times, but yesterday we could see it. And so warm welcome to all of you. EUA started working on these issues of quality culture since 2001. And in fact, in 2001, when we had when we were thinking about our first annual General Assembly, which took place at Roskilde University in Denmark, we thought that we needed to encourage our members to develop internal quality. And we called our General Assembly conference that year Autonomy and Quality. That was the title. To really drive home to the universities and to our members that you cannot be autonomous institutions if you don't have ways to monitor your activities. So that has been a very important theme since the beginning of the association, which was created in 2001. We've had lots of projects and that have allowed our members to work together and to exchange on these issues. The most recent publication is outside. It's called Eureka Moments, Top Tips for Internal Quality Assurance. So all this has been a very important part of the work of the organizations. The organization, and I'm sure it is true of Eurache as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about the agencies, though, because if I could, as a representative of the higher education institutions, pass a message to the agencies. I really truly believe that the agencies have also an extremely important role to play in promoting quality assurance. So it's not just the students, it's not just the institutions, but it's also the quality agencies. How you approach your work, how you approach your institutions, whether you are allowing, creating room for the institutions to develop their own processes. All this is really very important. And perhaps a final word, but I'm sure that Oliver Vittori, who is somewhere in this room, I hope, will talk about this again. It is about whether we need to talk about quality culture with or without an S. And whether we really need to have a uniform view of quality of that concept. Whether we shouldn't allow within each institution people to really take hold of this concept and decide how to define it. I have, my feeling is that quality and culture are two concepts that are extremely difficult to define. There have been books on the concept of quality trying to define quality, and I can tell you that in anthropology, there are hundreds of books on the concept of culture trying to define culture. So two very ambiguous concepts, and I have to say I'm happy with the ambiguity. It is a good thing to be ambiguous. We don't need to define everything.
Okay. My last question to both of you. What question, André, would you like to ask Jens? And Jens, what question would you like to ask André? André, maybe we start with you.
Well, Jens, you spoke about student involvement, and I'm sure this is a topic that's very dear to your heart. And I was wondering, and you pointed to some ways that this can be promoted. Can we talk a little bit more about this? And what can the institutions be doing? What could the agencies be doing? What could ESU could be doing as well to promote student involvement? The other part of this question has to do with the fact that it's been a challenge now for a challenge that has been recognized for many years, that the evaluation reports that we write, we're writing them to the institutions rather than to their students. And we're writing them in a language that's not really highly accessible to students who don't know much about quality assurance or about other aspects of running an institution. What can we do to facilitate this? Is there hope to find a solution so that when we have the results of the quality assurance, the students are able to find something of interest to them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think when it comes to the involvement of students, ESU already, obviously it's one of the big priorities of ESU to work on this, but they are still, sometimes when they are shouting it, especially when it comes to formal representation, let's say, for example, in delegations to the ministerial. Even there, you don't have each delegation bringing a student along, which is a very formal thing in a way, but it is a sign, and it's a visible sign. And even there, ESU sometimes, shouting very much alone in the woods. So maybe it's not only ESU that needs to shout, but also maybe also the other organizations and the other stakeholders that need to support them in shouting. But I think when it comes to the formal representation, these experts pools are a good step also to make a good claim for involving students, because they are properly trained, properly prepared, and they actually come and have read the stuff when you come to a QA audit. And I heard this from a German agency once. They're often very happy with the students because they come better prepared than some of the other people, which is also due to the fact that students always have to prove themselves in these events. When it comes to the question about accessible information, I would say that here, this links a bit to the bigger debate about transparency of information. Also, quality assurance is not only about getting a small little label or logo somewhere on your website, but you should actually be more open about maybe the reports and how public are reports. Actually, Bologna with Student Eyes touches a bit about this a little bit, and ESU actually proposes to for example, use the register, so to use EQA to be a bit more transparent with information about study programs within the European higher education area. So to have kind of a database, a European one, say like these are accredited study programs by organizations that are on the register. And these are some basic information on these programs. So to really move the level of information away from this very process-oriented, sometimes a bit administrative QA language to something that is also more accessible, not only to students, but I think also to the wider public, because that then also would increase the value of a proper quality assurance for what you could say societal responsiveness or accountability to society. If more people can follow and understand actually what we are doing here and why this program is a very good program, I think that would actually increase the value also for the general public then.
Any reaction to what Jens has said before you put your own question?
I don't know. Maybe I'll put Jens on the spot in asking this question, but what came to mind is the issue of the fact that many agencies now are moving toward an institutional level accreditation or evaluation. How do you feel about this? Do you feel that this maybe is going to be increasing the sort of the gap between the students and the quality assurance processes?
I think the challenge here is actually to ensure common practices then within, let's say, a higher education sector of a country or a sub-federal union. Because if you diversify these processes, it's easier to get around maybe including students in one or two processes if it happens on the institutional level than if it happens on the national level and on the program way. And that might be actually a threat. And then we come to this general discussion we had before about the unevenness, the potential of unevenness within the European higher education area, or in this case, even within the country. Then if you have so there the question then I would raise would be, how can you assure that then the processes are really followed up upon also in the institutions? Because I can also see it's a challenge for especially for smaller institutions to always involve the different parts in each internal QA process. And I think we have to find a creative answer for this to make sure that this works.
Thank you. André, you've got a question to Jens.
No.
That's the contrary.
I have
Jens to André.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry.
So we already touched a little bit on the new standards and guidelines, and there will be an interesting session after this one discussing them. But having a look at them and also following some of the discussions around this, from your perspective, André, do you think the revised European standards and guidelines, are they going to the right direction? Or do you also have some fears about limitations of institutional autonomy and maybe too strict prescriptions coming from the new standards and guidelines?
Well, let me just preface what I'm going to say by saying I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I'm not representing EUA's views because I don't know on this point what would be the answer. The ESG, one of the major differences between the ESG 2005 and 2015 is that part one was further developed, and we now have 10 standards there instead of the previous 7. You could see it as a limitation on institutional autonomy, but it really depends how all this is going to work out in practice. If if the institutions look at the ESG and use it as guidance to develop their own processes of internal quality management, I think it's all to the good. If and provided that the agencies do not feel that they are supposed to be evaluating all those things, that there is a clear understanding that there is a role here for the institutions to be developing their internal quality processes, and that the agencies are there to provide a check on how this is done, but not to do it in their stead. This would, in my view, and in line with what I said earlier, would be strengthening institutional autonomy rather than undermining it. It would help the institutions cope better with all the processes that they have to cope with that are basically linked to teaching and learning, and make sure that all this is in place. Now, one thing that I would like to point out, however, and we have, I don't know whether this publication was outside, Anna, but Tia Lukola, Anna Gover, and myself have gone through all the 10 standards to try to see what we know about what institutions are doing on each of those standards. And there are some that are particularly problematic. I mean, I will just cite one, which is about student-centered learning. How are we going to, what are the criteria that the agencies will be using to determine that the institutions have student-centered learning? What would be the definitions? What would be, how are we going to put that in practice? I think those are the questions that I would have that we need to be looking at carefully, and I hope that the agencies will continue to respect institutional autonomy and give the support that is needed for the institutions to implement all of this.
Okay. Thank you, André and Jens, for this first step of dialogue that you have accepted to have here. Now, I would like to see if the audience wants to join this dialogue and ask questions or provide comments, reactions to what you have heard. The speakers will take the questions or the comments in a row, so maybe 4 or 5 questions in a row, and then answer them. Please specify if your comment or question is addressed specifically to one or the other speakers of both of them. Okay, so let's go. Other questions or comments?
Ralph Tarak, UA. I have the question to both speakers related, or a remark related to the issue of Bologna. Both of you have expressed that you were a little bit worried about lack of uniformity, about too much diversity, too much differentiation, and so on. And I dare to disagree with that. I don't think that Bologna is a question of being uniform. In a uniform system, you don't learn from each other. I think it is much more about if there are differences, that they are clear and that they should not be barriers. Difference should never mean to be a barrier, but not to pull down differences. In any system, in any interesting system, the interest is precisely in the diversity. So I would like to get your reaction on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have another one? Over there? And over there? 1, 2, 3, yeah. Okay.
Ludwig Neisses, University of Luxembourg. I'd like to make a comment on what you said about the terrible language of quality control and quality assurance. Really, I think what we should be doing is go back, when we explain things to students and universities, go back to the origins of quality control. There is a book by somebody called Radford in the 1920s that speaks about quality management and quality control in those days in the car industry, and that is really where it comes from. You look at your product, which is the car, and then quality control avoids defects. Quality management is beforehand, is a process beforehand that looks at the processes that avoid defects in the end product. So what is our end product? Our end product is a well-educated student, okay, or excellent research, of course, on the other side of the equation. And if you look at all the literature in the industry, it's really quite clear, and it's very hard to understand why our language is unclear, but the industry language is crystal clear.
Thank you. I think there was a question by Fiona. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel for your interesting comments. Fiona Crozier from QAA, United Kingdom. My question's addressed to André. I completely agreed with your analysis of the revision of the European standards and guidelines and the reasons behind the increase in the number of standards in Part 1. And I also agreed with your... I'm here. I also agreed with your statement that there's no need to define everything, and that maybe
there is room for what?
no need to define everything
Yeah.
tightly, and maybe sometimes a little bit of chaos isn't such a bad thing. And I wondered if you saw any link between those two statements. You specifically quoted how agencies might look at student-centred learning, and as a specific example of a difference in Part 1. Do you think there's any link between a lack of definition in all cases, but encouragement and support in terms of how the agencies might look at that specific aspect of Part 1 of the standards and guidelines?
Okay. One or two more, yes? And over there, I think, yes. There was this gentleman first, I think, a couple of minutes ago, and then you. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Sadiq Midraj from Zayed University, United Arab Emirates. You mentioned talking about improving quality assurance through three major variables. That includes internationalization. I was wondering whether you see this would go beyond conferences, forums, something would resemble Washington Accord that Abbott has done. Do you see international quality assurance standards for certain specializations? Thank you.
Thank you. One more here, and maybe then we can start answering. Yes, that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fernando Galán from ESU. I have a question regarding Bologna in general, but how that applies also to QA. It's you were both speaking about the Bologna losing momentum, but at the same time, I've seen that it's losing momentum from the government side, but the stakeholders organizations are gaining momentum on leading Bologna or steering Bologna. Not only the stakeholders themselves, but also the European Commission and Council of Europe in that sense. So how have you seen this power balance between the national governments and the European-wide institutions and stakeholder organizations? And how that also applies to QA, for example, in the revised version of the ESGs, because also it was led by the institutional, the European stakeholders and then endorsed by the national government. So how do you see this balance? Because at the end of the day, who has to implement that is at the national level and not at the European one itself.
Okay. Well, the speakers have not always specified it was for you or for you, but for both of you. Okay, let's go. Jens, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I can pick out some parts and maybe start with Fernando's and then go backwards. First of all, I think it's true that stakeholders actually, well, I don't know whether gain momentum or whether they just have a stable momentum while the countries are actually pulling out a little bit. Also, if you look into this participation in the ministerial conference, you see that the stakeholders are always there with a rather stable size of delegation, so they also make a point in a way of being present at the table, while with the countries it's actually more fluctuating. And the 2015 Yerevan conference was actually the first one where you had countries who are members of the Bologna process who didn't show up to the Bologna ministerial conference, which is interesting if you think that the communiqué theoretically should also be something that they hold true, even if they don't formally show it up. So I am not sure whether that actually changed the power balance, because as you said, you need the countries to actually do something. So it might actually lead to kind of a detachment maybe from the national dynamics, from European dynamics and national dynamics, which might be a bit of a move back from a European higher education area, or just the acknowledgement, okay, this is how far we can go with the European higher education area, and from here on it is everybody builds their house within this frame as they want to. Concerning the question about how do we explain our language to the students and going back to the product to explain quality assurance, I think the problem connected with this is, while it helps to kind of find the right language, but you were saying that, okay, QA should ensure a well-educated student. But I think already when you then talk to your students, let's say in a lecture theater like this, there might be differences what is seen as well-educated. So within this lecture theater, so transporting your idea how you move to this aim to each and every one of them, that they follow you, might actually be the big challenge. But I think the idea is good to go back and say, like, okay, we have to maybe detach a little bit from the reports we are writing that follow certain criteria, that follow certain formal guidelines, and really engage the people we want to reach in dialogue about what we are doing and why we are doing it. And maybe as the last point, Professor Tarraf's point, who was saying that too much differentiation is actually no problem because differences make it interesting also. And I agree with you. The point where I see it more problematic are these, let's say, more structural points that you agreed upon in the European higher education area as a group of people, like a diploma supplement free of charge in English. And if there's a diversity in this, it actually hinders other aims like the mobility and so on. So there should be kind of the structural setup should be agreed upon, and you should work with this. But how you then implement, let's say, the more soft parts of it, that should obviously be within the institutions and countries to their traditions, because you can't force feed anybody any certain way to do things.
Thank you. André?
Yeah. I would agree with Jens, taking that last answer to Rolf, that the concept of diversity is really very important, but for certain things we need to agree on processes. So that I won't repeat that, but I see the first three questions actually as being connected in some ways, because it is asking about how much do we define things, to what extent we can define things, and to what extent we should allow for diversity. I my own tendency is to say that, is to agree, there is a French thinker whose name I can't remember now, who said, if you clarify things, you clarify them at your own risk. So it is, ambiguity is good. Creativity is good, diversity is good, and all those things are really extremely important. Quality assurance in higher education cannot be compared to quality assurance in industry. So we're always going to be dealing with a range of things that are difficult to capture. It's not like looking at a car. So we're going to have to always, I think, struggle with a level of ambiguity and diversity. Now, the question about the Washington Accord, which I'd like to pick up on. In fact, already in 1999, there were discussions in Europe about whether we could come up with something like this. And in examining the success and the take-up of the Washington Accord, one cannot be very optimistic, let's say, that this could be extended to so many different countries. I mean, they have progressed extremely slowly in one very specific field. And the engineers in Europe have managed to do something like this, in fact. So this is the case for engineering, but it cannot be the case for any kind of quality assurance process, whether it is about the institutions or other things. ECAR provides, that is the European Quality Assurance Register, provides a platform to recognize the trustworthy agencies and allow, in a sense, what the Washington Accord would allow. That is the idea behind it, anyway. Voilà.
Voilà,
c'est tout.
Voilà, c'est tout.
Oui.
I think there was a question with Fiona, but maybe students.
Yeah, Fiona, did I answer your question? Not really.
Ambiguity. Ambiguity is good as well. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left for a second row of questions, comment. Yes, one over there.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. I have just one question. I'm coming from Turkey, one of the institutions. The question is, was there any influence of common assessment framework over the ESG? I'm directing the questions to Ms. André-Surko.
Can you repeat?
Was there any influence of common assessment framework, which is EFQM model, over the ESG that currently developed?
It's a very technical question.
Yeah, I would prefer that someone who was in the E4 discussion answers this question.
Okay. Thank you.
But thank you.
There's one over there. Don.
Over there, yes, Don. And I forgot the fact of having several questions in a row. I fell in a trap.
Hello, I'm Don Westerheiden from CHEPS in the Netherlands. Thank you indeed very much for this interesting panel debate. I would like to go back to an issue that André raised at the very beginning when she said that one of the achievements finally is now that teaching and learning is so high on the agenda. I'm not one of those who has been to all of the 10 forums, but I've been around in quality assurance for more than those 10 years. I remember that 20, 25 years ago, when we did our first studies on impact of external quality assurance, we heard the same thing. Finally, quality of education is on the agenda. Teaching and learning is on the agenda. How come we're still talking about the same thing 25 years onwards? Is it now so high on the agenda that we can finally declare victory as against Alex Usher? Everybody was laughing, so I guess that's not the answer. Second possibility, are our measurement instruments so sensitive that we can detect differences of less than 1% per year? Knowing our social scientific methodology, I don't think that that's the answer. A third possibility, we all believe and we all talk about it as if this is finally high on the agenda. But we are the people who are willing to pay a lot of money to come here, spend our days here. What about all these other teachers here in the building who are not willing to do that? Are we really reaching out to the normal teachers, to the normal students? So I would also like to hear Jens's comment on that. Or is this just preaching for the converted?
Thank you for the question. There is one more here. Thank you.
Yeah, Doris Herman from one of the accreditation agencies, AQUAS in Germany, so from Earth and not from Mars. I have two remarks. In my experience in Germany, we have a system to include students on different levels of external QA, so in the boards, in the panel of experts, and so on. So sometimes if there's a discussion about involvement of students, I have still the feeling that you have a baby face position. But in my, my feeling is that you have a very strong position in the QA procedures, at least in Germany. Perhaps it's different in other European countries. And I would suggest to strengthen the discussion between the student organizations and the agencies about role and expectations. That would be very helpful for us. So that's one remark, and the other remark is about student-centered learning. You touched this issue, and Fiona also touched this issue. We have difficulties to interpret it. So if I would take this criteria, this standard, very serious, and I would interpret it strictly, I cannot accredit German programs anymore. Yeah. Because there's little student-centered learning. So I think we need a general discussion between different stakeholders how to interpret the standard. And perhaps we also should go back to the roots and discuss what is a good quality, what is a good study program? What do we expect from a study program? Sometimes when we develop criteria and indicators and standards, I have the feeling that we follow a fashion, but it would be helpful to be back to the roots. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can take one more and then have the answers or comments. Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is Christina and I'm from UK University. And I prepared my questions, so I won't go on forever. So my question is for Jens, really. And I would like to ask you if you have come across the role concept customers and partners in your work, and if you have done so, well, in internal quality assurance, what do you make of these concepts?
Okay, so a few minutes left for the answers. Who wants to start? Yes,
Okay.
André? Thank you.
Well, I'd like to respond to Don's question. In trends, we're not talking about the quality assurance of teaching and learning. We're talking about teaching and learning as a core function of institutions. And the reason we're saying that it is a priority is because we see that there is quite a bit of activities around teaching and learning, and that the institutions do take it very seriously. When you're sitting on the outside, you could be misled into thinking that research has really, and the importance of research has really invaded the universe of higher education, particularly of universities, because of the prevalence of rankings. But in fact, through the study, we were able to show that there is a great deal of commitment that is, despite, in fact, the financial crisis in many countries, that the institutions are continuing to work hard to develop processes and teaching and a teaching environment that is good for the students. So this is what I wanted to respond to. I know the question was not addressed to me, but about the student-centered learning, I also worry about this. I mean, because too much ambiguity is not a good thing, right? So we've got to have, I think, some common understanding of what that means and what are the elements of student-centered learning. I mean, I sometimes hear people talk about this in ways that really make my hair stand on my back, I mean, it's like, oh my God, no, that's not what it is. And so there is a need to talk about this a little bit more, I think, before we can start evaluating whether they are doing it or not. So would that answer your question, Fiona? No? Okay. Okay, Jens.
Okay. Concerning Don's question, I would go with your third option. So maybe we're just very optimistic people who are in kind of a cycle that just, wake up every morning and we're optimistic again. So we just think this is going to be the day where teaching and learning is high on the agenda, and we get there again. And maybe we also try to get to a self-fulfilling prophecy here by stating it over and over again. because I think there are pointers that direct towards an increased attention of it. And I think the whole student-centered learning discussion, also with the including it in the standards and guidelines, is a point towards that. But at the same time, we see that when you look into issues of institutional prestige, if you look into academic career path and all these other things, teaching and learning still plays a minor role. So there are very many other factors where we still need to pick up the role of teaching and learning, which is maybe a bit outside of the realm what QA can do, which is maybe the larger higher education policy discussions. But when we get to a point that actually QA results, well, that's also why the whole communication thing might be so interesting. If we manage to communicate our QA results to a wider public in a more clearer fashion, that might actually also raise the importance of teaching and learning in a way to assess hold the institutions accountable and to assess the output of an institution and not only focus on, I don't know, competitive research funding and things like this. Concerning the position of students in QA, true, the German system actually, I mean, a lot of these 21 QA pools, some of them actually have been copied on the German model. So the German QA pool is, I think, one of the structures that works fairly well. I mean, there is still communication problems once in a while, and you sometimes have problems with the structure. You always have this, but I would say it's a fairly well-working system, and that also then leads in combination with agencies taking this issue seriously to a very good working inclusion of students. Whether that would also hold for every kind of program assessment within institutions that are institutionally accredited and do their own QA might be a different question, and that gets a bit to the diversity issue. So that's why maybe it sounds a bit like a broken record if people picking up student positions talk about student involvement all the time. But also, if you move beyond to other countries, there is still it's still a more problematic issue. So it might be a bit not boring maybe for some of the participants from countries where it actually works. And maybe then see it less as a criticism to the practice of EQAF, but more to a general reminder that, okay, this is an important thing and we have to make sure that it works. But I think the other part, that making sure that students who take part are taken serious by the panel, that's something that would also be valid for the German context. And I haven't seen the results, but the colleagues at INCHA that did this study where they actually surveyed people who took part in QA audits. And they surveyed both the practitioner from the working life, the students, and the professors, and they had a lot of different questions. And I think that this study might actually point to some of the problems that we might still have even in the German context in that sense. And maybe one short point on student-centered learning, since there are no more questions, Esu can't kill me for this. One thing that is seldomly also said, I mean, because you are now talking about student-centered learning again from an institutional perspective, but it's a two-way street. It also needs students that want to be in the center. So that's the second issue. If you want to, as a QA agency, start auditing programs for having student-centered learning components, and you have a group of students that it's getting more heterogeneous and that's harder to activate, and you have certain framework conditions when it comes to class sizes and so on, that might actually not even be in the ability of QA responsible people to influence that so directly. So that is another problem. Very quick, because we're over the time, on the customers versus partners view of students in QA. The only proper answer I can get to this is when we did the survey for ESU, for the Quest project, we actually went through this through the other side. So we asked students, what do you see as higher education for? Which is to a certain extent the same thing, but just coming from the other direction. And there you could actually, while in general the idea of higher education as value for money or as preparation for a career was more or less as present as the idea of higher education as transforming yourself, as being, I don't know, becoming a better person, as enriching your knowledge. So it's not as if one of the two views was more pronounced, but it was also possible for the students in that survey to rank high both of them. So it was not pick either or. So maybe this, having this as one opposing the other is maybe also the wrong approach. Maybe in each and every one of them there's a little bit of a customer and a little bit of a partner, and they want to be both, maybe.
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 Okay, thank you very much, Jens. We have come to the end of this session, so thank you very much for your participation, and have your nice coffee break. Don't block the way out, as it was said yesterday. Thank you very much.